Alright, boys and girls, 3 episodes in, and we are finally looking at the very first feature-length Alice in Wonderland adaptation from 1915. You ever get that feeling like you see something just out of the corner of your eye, but it's not there? Weird. If you've been paying attention to the adaptations we've looked at so far, like you should, you'll notice that they run parallel to cinematic milestones in England and America. The 1915 version of Alice in Wonderland is no different. The 1910s were the decade when the film medium started to come into its own. Leading the way were filmmakers like D.W. Griffith, whose back-to-back epics The Birth of a Nation and Intolerance revolutionized what feature films are today. The techniques that Griffith developed in narrative scope, cinematography, editing, and music changed the motion picture form forever. In that world-changing year of 1915, W. Young directed the first feature film adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. Unfortunately, it didn't influence cinema in the same way as D.W. Griffith's early epics did, and it has largely fallen into obscurity. But despite its obscure status, it's one of the best Alice in Wonderland adaptations and a hidden gem of the 1910s. Now, one thing you'll notice with these adaptations is that adapting Alice in Wonderland is not the same as adapting The Wizard of Oz. That story had many more action beats and less of a reliance on dialogue that made it translate well to cinema. Adapting Alice in Wonderland is more like adapting William Shakespeare. Both Shakespeare and Lewis Carroll had distinctive, poetic styles of writing. As great as they both were, their stories have a lot of talking and not much action. So, when adapting Alice in Wonderland, the challenge becomes how to do justice to Lewis Carroll's iconic words while keeping the story moving forward. Being the first feature film adaptation of the story, it was necessary to find a framing device for the narrative that would work cinematically. The book starts off with Alice sitting by a riverbank on a warm afternoon, falling asleep and seeing the White Rabbit. W. Young, who was also the screenwriter as well as the director, chose to show Alice interacting with things from her life in the real world that would influence her dream when she goes to Wonderland. These include playing cards, chess pieces, an owl, a cat in a tree, and of course, a white rabbit. You hear that, MGM's The Wizard of Oz? Alice in Wonderland 1915 did it first! Speaking of which, remember all the furries we saw in the Silent Oz adaptations we watched during Oztober?
Yeah, you know you love them, you filthy animal.
Well, this silent version of Alice in Wonderland has a literal furry convention in it. Look at that! This is in a movie from 1915, 100 years ahead of its time. But in all seriousness, these are some really impressive animal costumes. Better than a lot of the costumes that came along decades later, in fact. Kudos. Being a feature film adaptation of the book, it hits most of the story beats while maintaining a remarkable sense of atmosphere and some pretty good visual effects for the time. Though I will admit that the falling down the rabbit hole effect is one of the lamer ones I've seen. It's amazing how few of these adaptations have a good falling effect. This movie clocks in at just under an hour, but it was originally longer. The version we can see touches on some characters and events from Through the Looking Glass, but unfortunately, those portions of the film have mostly been lost. I hope that those scenes can someday be found, along with as many films and scenes from the silent era as possible. Despite the fact that this film isn't as well known as other Alice in Wonderland adaptations, it's definitely one of the best. It creates a hypnotic atmosphere that is emblematic of the power of silent cinema, and featured a narrative framework that was many years ahead of its time. If you're going to check this film out, I'd highly recommend the 4K restoration that can be found on a YouTube channel called RRPPO. The original score for that version was composed by a person called Phantom Wise. I'll provide links to both of their channels in the description. Oh, and one last thing. This film boasts a particularly creepy version of my favorite Wonderland character, the Cheshire Cat. There's something about him that's just... Ah! That's horrifying!
I love it.
Oh gee whiz, a delicious morsel has just materialized out of nowhere, along with a note. What does it say? Eat me. Okay, first of all, rude. Second of all, that's weird. Third of all, hell no, I'm not eating this thing. Who knows where it's been? It could be poison. Well, the mint flavor Oreos are the best. Well,
stay tuned tomorrow because we're going to be looking at the very first adaptation that was done by Walt Disney Studios. Yeah, before the more famous version from 1951. Oh, this is really good. I'll be right back.